Okay, today I've decided to do a video commentary on the film Avventura, which was directed by Michelangelo Antonioni and released in 1960. The story has a broken narrative. It starts as a detective story when a group of rich Italians go for a cruise off the coast of Italy. They stop to visit a volcanic island called l'Isola Bianca, during which one of them, Anna, goes missing. It then appears to become a love triangle of sorts when her lover, Sandro, and best friend Claudia fall in love during their search for her. The sequence I have chosen to analyse is the final one, when the narrative once again takes an unexpected turn. Claudia, believing that Anna has returned, looks for Sandro and in fact discovers that he has spent the night with Gloria Perkins, a supposed journalist, but actually a prostitute. I believe it encompasses all of the key themes of the illness of feeling, the nature in cities, the lack of communication between man and woman and man and nature, tradition versus modernity, and the North versus the South. The lack of a conclusion and the lack of speech exemplifies the new era of cinema to which the film belonged and Antonioni's new way of looking. A long shot of the archway entrance of the San Domenico Hotel shows Claudia running towards the cinema in despair after finding Sandro with Gloria Perkins. Throughout the whole film, Antonioni uses framing to draw attention to certain elements in his scenes, not only to emphasize separation and isolation, but to give people an aesthetic quality, seemingly saying, "Look at me." Here she is running through the frame, so we are made to pay attention, which emphasizes the dark chaos from which she is emerging, her need to escape what she has just seen, and showing her sense of hurt. Also, she is the only person in the frame, so it is showing her isolation and aloneness. The following establishing shot is of an empty car park in which she enters from the right. Having exited the previous scene on the right, this is a discontinuity edit, which makes us feel disoriented, mimicking the disorientation she is feeling. The shot starts a couple of seconds before she actually enters. This gives us the idea of the camera waiting for her, another technique that Antonioni uses several times. The viewer has the feeling of the camera moving to get a better view. In the beginning of the film, Claudia was in actual fact the observer or even the sidekick. We see that she has now become the main character and is taking center stage. Now there is almost a feeling of an omnipresence, which could be Anna watching her. She runs across the car park, emphasizing the idea of distance. She wants to be as far away from the situation that she can be. The idea of distance is also emphasized by the sound of her footsteps and wind, which can be heard, and showing her distress. The sound of the echoing footsteps started 2 sequences before when she goes to see Patrizia in her bedroom. The continuity of the sound exaggerates the distance she has travelled. She looks down over a guardrail, appearing to look for somebody who reminds us of Anna, who is missing, representing a malaise in society. She sees a man. They move until they are directly above one another. He appears to approach and be about to speak to her when she turns away. The symmetry and distance emphasizes of the two characters emphasizes the isolation between the sexes, who seem unable to interact or communicate with one another. The man is a local, reminding the viewer that she is a stranger, and mirrors an earlier scene when men look down at her from a balcony. The shot is also in real time, and Antonioni avoids ellipses, which together with the fixed camera exaggerates the passing of time and even slows it down and makes us pay attention to sights and sounds which are often lost in the narrative. In contrast, the narrative is full of ellipses. Another long shot follows, but from a high angle. She appears to have lost her energy, and we see Claudia walking up a slight incline, appearing to need to hold on to the handrail. This exaggerates her difficult journey. The adventure in this film is an emotional journey. In the background, we see the bomb tower of the San Domenico church, and this contrasts with an earlier scene when both Claudia and Sandro are at the top of a church tower and he asks her to marry him. This bombed church represents what is now left of this ruined memory. We then cut to a mid-shot from behind of Claudia, with her being on the right of the screen and the tree on the left of her. At this point, the noise of the wind intensifies. We cannot see her face and can see the tree being blown violently by the wind. This is representing her inner emotions and the turbulence that she is feeling. Antonioni often uses landscapes as pathetic fallacy, which are often a protagonist themselves, that is to say, they are truly part of the story. It also seems that in this shot he is drawing on the origins of cinema. This is because not a single word has been spoken yet in this scene, and it also reminds us of the 1895 short film Le Repas de Bébé by Lumière, when spectators were left fascinated by the leaves' movement in the wind. The camera returns to its original place at the beginning of the sequence to follow Sandro with a long shot. He duplicates Claudia's journey through the archway. By showing the two protagonists in the same environment, but at different times, this again highlights the isolation and lack of communication between them. This is a film that runs throughout the film. All the couples are experiencing problems and do not get along. This can be seen in an earlier scene with the pharmacist and his wife. Marriage is no longer a guarantee of happiness, or in fact is not guaranteed to last, and society is changing and man needs to adapt to different values. He is chasing her, albeit slowly, which is another theme of the film. Men chase women throughout the film. This can be seen also again in a previous scene when the men are chasing Gloria Perkins. Sandro can also be seen as a predator, like the men that chase Gloria Perkins, but just a more subtle urban version. His suit emphasizes that these characters are born of the economic miracle and are of a more upper class. A mid-shot catches Sandro as he stops by a tree. His predatory nature is exaggerated by a dog barking in the background. At the same time, the barking can also be contrasted with the noise of a car, which subtly highlights the conflict between nature and modernity which runs throughout the film. Here we are also able to see the San Domenico sign of a monastery which has been converted into a hotel, which further underscores the changes taking place, this time the loss of religion. The links with the past that might teach us how to live are being cut. His simple act of pulling a piece of bark from a tree conveys his anguish. The impulsive nature of his action shows that emotions do not need to be portrayed dramatically. Antonioni focuses on the insignificant, unconscious moments which actually fill most people's days because of the crisis of the human condition which afflicts his characters, and he is questioning the motives which guide their actions. It reveals also his lack of respect for nature and his inability to interact with it. His childish nature, which was seen earlier when caught, he tried to hide on the bench with Gloria, and his destructiveness seen earlier when he destroyed the young architect's drawing. This is a complete contrast to Claudia, who whilst on the island Liscia Bianca, actually tries to straighten a broken sort of twig, demonstrating her potential ability to overcome the sickness affecting society. A close-up low angle of Claudia follows, and initially her head isn't in the frame. She rears up dramatically crying, and the low angle and her sudden burst into frame accentuates her movement, as does the close-up contrasted with the previous long shots. These all add to her sense of hurt. The sound of her sobs is loud as the camera is near to her, so we share fully her distress. She cries quite dramatically until we hear Sandro approach through his slow, measured footsteps. She does not want to show weakness in front of him. By controlling her tears, she is portrayed as a strong female at a time when women were just beginning to get their independence. When she controls her breathing, this shot again mimics an earlier shot on the island when Claudia was crying after Anna's disappearance. This time, the sky is a sort of gloomy grey and she is in shadow, which is showing that she is not as happy as she was before. Despite the close-up, she only occupies half of the frame, and the distance between her and the church tower in the background reminds the viewer of Sandro's proposal to her and how far away and how much things have changed since then. A long shot has Sandro walking into the scene from the left. The sound of his footsteps provide continuity with the previous shot and also emphasize his slow pace and slow down the scene. Claudia is immobile, in the background in front of two archways facing away. She is still isolated and alone. As he walks past Claudia, the camera pans with him, which emphasizes that he is ignoring her and the separation between them. The focus is now on Sandro. Behind him are his two greatest failures, his dream of becoming an architect and his failure with women, first with Anna and now with his lack of faithfulness towards Claudia. He stops just before the bench, mimicking and underlining Claudia's unnatural lack of movement. We hear a sound which repeats 3 times, potentially a bird or a boat, which could be a religious reference to Peter's betrayal of Jesus Christ as he has now betrayed Claudia. A close-up, low-angle shot of Sandro has Claudia walking into shot. We hear her footsteps approaching before we see her, which adds an ominous sense. Her headless figure then towers over his left shoulder. The low-angle emphasizes the sinister feeling by making her appear larger than Sandro and exaggerates the bowing of his head, giving him the air of a penitent sinner. The black clothing blocks the light and makes the right-hand side of the screen darker. Black is often associated with death and punishment, perhaps symbolizing the death of their relationship. The other side of the screen is light, because human nature is not just good or evil, but a mixture of both. This is not the American cinema where the good are the good and the bad are the bad. Sandro is flawed, but he could still be redeemed, or we could accept him with his defects. In the previous shot, when Sandro approached Claudia, she stopped crying, whereas now when Claudia approaches Sandro, he does the opposite. Here he begins to weep, showing he is weaker and more cowardly. This complete reversal of gender stereotypes is shocking, and must have been even more shocking in the 60s, as crying was regarded as a sign of weakness. Although, as his character is the one which has been fleshed out the most, his motives are ambiguous. Is he crying because he got caught? He is truly sorry, for the loss of Anna, or for his failed architecture career. The next 3 shots transitions are relatively shorter than the previous shots and form a symmetrical mini-narrative with the ending of the previous shot. The camera alternates between a low-angle mid-close-up shot of Claudia's face and a low-angle shot of Sandro. Not a word or even a look has been exchanged between them. The lack of speech and reverse shots add to this. It is making us pay attention to their expressions to try and understand. It will not be spelled out to us. Again, because she is standing behind him, the low angle exaggerates her size, and the tone of her top and head, dark and light, mirror the building behind her. As she exhales, extra diegetic music begins to play. It's a slow melancholic clarinet. This drowns out the noise of Sandro's tears, making the viewer potentially think that they are crocodile tears. A close-up shot of when Claudia places her hand on Sandro's head. It shows the stark contrast between the lightness of her hand and the darkness of Sandro's hair, demonstrating her kindness and forgiveness with his darkness and unfaithfulness. Also, once the hand touches his head, the music intensifies, and there is a synchronicity between the movement and music, which makes them stand out. The final shot is a long shot of both Sandro and Claudia from behind. The frame is split into two. On the left-hand side far away is a snowy Mount Etna, and on the right-hand side very near is a grey gloomy wall. This reflects the positions of the characters themselves. Claudia, being on the side of Mount Etna, signifies her positivity and a potential way to move forward. Claudia finds solace in landscape, whereas Sandro, being in front of the wall, signifies a block and standstill of which Sandro cannot get out, along with his pessimism. Nature is used as an element or background to human existence. Their tragedy is judged against the natural world. At the same time, the artistic nature of the shot questions nature itself. The ending doesn't present any conclusion or resolution. The extra diegetic jarring end notes add to this and suggest the uncertainty of their relationship and remains unbalanced. Do they have a future? The image reminds us also of the pietà. Claudia has an almost maternal instinct towards the man who has betrayed her, and he doesn't know how to treat her, which leaves us full of questions. It is open to interpretation. Does she become a function of his needs? The end shot is so stylized that it reminds us of a picture, subconsciously reminding us that it is a story we are watching. The stark, formal, focused moment represents an inner emotional state. Their dark clothing also makes them stand out, emphasizing that they do not belong. They are from Rome and belong to a higher social class, which further highlights their inability to interact with nature. Claudia, however, is from a slightly different class. She could have sincerity and earnestness, but her action of stroking his hair belies that she is and has been pulled down. It also reminds us of another time. The depth of field is clear throughout the sequence, but especially here, perhaps because although we can see clearly, it doesn't mean that it will lead to clarity of thought. Mount Etna can also be seen as reminding us of the rocks on the island, again reminding us of the missing Anna, who has now been replaced by Claudia. Okay, in conclusion, events unfold from a series of camera positions, all of which uncover new details of a scene, but none of which conforms to a stable narrative logic, enabling the spectator to assign them unequivocal meaning. Contrary to most films, the final sequence does not provide any conclusions. Anna's disappearance remains unresolved, as does the relationship between Claudia and Sandro. Antonioni uses a variety of long and close-up shots, and images repeatedly recall early events in the film. Also, the lengthy shots approach real time, allowing them for reflection and observation. His frames are full of background details that are important. Characters and landscapes are given equal value, and landscape and building are used to portray emotions. His lack of dialogue, his use of framing, the fact that the characters never look directly at one another, all encompass the themes of the lack of communication between man and woman and man and nature, and lack of feeling which run throughout the film. There are also no ellipses, point of view shots, or reverse shots, which slow down time or give additional character information. There is no resolution to the disappearance or even to the love story, and the final sequence therefore goes against many established cinema traditions going back to the origins of cinema, and is all the more successful for it.